Ted, you are good to go.
All right, we are live. So hello, everybody. Welcome to the December 21st meeting of the Design Review Board. This meeting is being conducted utilizing teleconferencing and electronic means consistent with the state of California executive orders regarding COVID-19. Live stream and Zoom is being utilized for this meeting. In case of technical issues, meetings will be uploaded to the city website as soon as possible after the meeting concludes. We will be conducting today's meeting in a virtual setting using Zoom. Design Review Board members and staff are participating from remote locations. Members of the public may view and listen to the meeting by use of Zoom as noted in the city's website and on the agenda. Members of the public wishing to speak may do so during public comment or may comment on agenda items during the discussion of each item and must be logged into Zoom to do so. Anyone using abusive, vulgar, offensive, threatening, or harassing language, personal attacks of any kind, or offensive terms that target specific individuals or groups will be muted and removed from the meeting. Please do not abuse this new way to provide public comment. So that is done. Can we have a roll call, please, John?
Sure. Melissa Hanley.
Present.
Marshall Bell. Muted real quick.
There, can you hear me?
Yep.
There he is.
Terry Bush.
Here.
Lars Langberg.
Here.
And Ted Luthen.
Here.
And we have Christine Level absent from today's meeting. So that concludes the roll call.
Thank you for that. We don't have any minutes to approve, so let's move on to a planning department update on matters of general interest. What's going on in planning, John?
So a couple quick ones. Last week, we had our housing element that was delivered to the Planning Commission for their recommendation to City Council to draft, adopt the draft ordinance and then some changes to the next cycle of housing element policies for the city of Sebastopol. That is going to be heard at the city council meeting on January 3rd. So if there's anybody interested in that, please show up and provide any comments. If you have any additional questions, you can reach out to either myself or Carrie. And we can get those comments into the report that Carrie will be providing to City Council. And other than that, we're still working away on, we sent out the incompleteness letter to the City Ventures project. That is a 80-unit housing project at the north end of town behind the Riley building. And once they get those comments back, they'll move on to the next step in the process. So that's about it for planning right now. A lot of housing element stuff, which has taken up a lot of time and effort.
Yeah, that's good stuff. All right, any questions of staff from board members? There being none, we will move on to, do we have any comments from the public regarding items not on our agenda? Anybody just have something they want to share? Not seeing any hands go up. Did we receive anything via email or anything like that, John?
For any items on today's agenda?
Items
not on the agenda. I'm sorry.
Correct. Yep.
Yep.
Nothing. Okay. Any conflicts of interest? Any board members have any conflicts? All right. Then let's move on to our regular agenda items. First up is 250 Morris Street sign exception, whatever. It's a redo of something we saw a couple weeks ago, right?
Correct. Yeah. So the board saw this at their October 5th Design Review Board meeting. They provided direction to the applicant to come back with some revised signage that drops the total square footage down to 175 total square feet to remove the monument sign for the allowance of the third wall sign, and also removing the external illumination, and they provided some flat cutout lettering wall signs. Other than that, the project is mostly the same. The colors and palette stuff didn't change from the original design. And Sarah is the applicant here and can provide any additional updates or answer any questions that the board or public may have. So with that, I'll hand it over to Sarah if she's got anything additional to include.
Sounds good. Thanks, John. Hi, Sarah.
Hello. I don't have any additional comments. We made the changes that John had mentioned, and so we'd just like to get your guys' review on it.
Sounds good. Thank you for that. Board members, any questions of staff or our applicant?
I have a clarification question.
Yep, fire away.
So we have 3 signs up on the canopy on the building, right? And then we have, I thought in the staff report it said we don't have a monument sign, but so this other sign that's sort of pasted to the CMU wall is not a monument sign. It's just another sign that's part of what we're looking at. The key auto body is now Caliber Collision. What is that I'm looking at there?
That's just a temporary banner that's not staying. Once the signs go up, that gets removed.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Perfect.
That's my only question.
Thank you, Lars. Any other questions or comments from board members? Not seeing any, so we'll bring it back to the board for deliberation. Any further comments? This looks like it kind of responds to most of what we were asking for before. We were asking for a better scale on the photo elevations. Looks like we've got that. I think the flat cutouts are looking fine. I think the color scheme looks good. Anybody have any concerns?
Yeah, I'd just like to thank the applicant for, hearing the comments and responding to them in a most respectful way.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks for that, Carrie. I think that's a good point. Excellent. Yeah, I think this is going to be a nice addition to this building too. Give it a little makeover. All right. Someone sounds like we're all kind of in agreement on this. Someone want to throw a motion on the table?
You just need to open up the public comment.
Oh, I'm sorry. I always
No worries.
forget that. Thank you for reminding me. Anybody from the public have any comments on this application? Not seeing any hands going up. Nobody waving at us. John, did we get anything? Any communication on this?
Not for this agenda item.
Okay. All right, then we'll close the public comment. Back to the board. Someone want to throw a motion on the table? Just
a question or comment. Are we being asked to not just approve this or deny it, but there's an exception that we have to grant?
Yeah, so the exception would be
for the third sign,
would be for
right?
the third sign, correct?
For the third sign, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Got it.
Yeah, the total square footage is the overall maximum allowed, and the board's direction was to not exceed that 175. It was just
That's right.
for the additional sign and then removal of the monument sign.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay.
So I'll make a motion to approve the project as submitted.
Sounds good. Can I end on that?
I'll second it.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Something, could I make a friendly amendment to your motion? Could we include a provision that the temporary signs come down as soon as the permanent signs go up?
You bet.
You acceptable to that? All right, and Marshall, does your second still stand?
Yes.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second. Why don't we go ahead and call a question? I don't think there'll be any further discussion. All in favor of approval, please raise your hand, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All right,
Seeing
so we
four
have
hands
4
and hearing
ayes,
one. Yep,
5 ayes,
Five
with
ayes.
Christine Level being absent.
sounds
So
good.
that motion passes.
Motion carries and motion passes and signs are approved. So get them up. Thank you for that. All right, moving to our next agenda item, our big ticket item here of our agenda. So we've got Healdsburg Townhome Project. John, would you like to give us a staff report on this?
Yeah, so the applicant Kathy Austin is looking for feedback from the design review board on the proposed project at 7621 Healdsburg Avenue. This hearing is preliminary review with the design review board and no decision will be made today. The project is a mixed use development with commercial buildings along the frontage of Healdsburg Avenue and attached townhomes on the southern end of the property that faces Murphy Avenue. Project will include a major subdivision tentative map, small lot subdivision, and initial study for environmental review. Project will also be subject to the design review guidelines of Sebastopol, tree protection plan, and any tree removal permitting processes. The overall project proposes to construct 15 1,120 square foot, 2-bedroom, 2.5 bath, 2-story townhomes on the R7 zone part of the parcel, along with a 3,000 square foot, 2-story commercial building that faces along Healdsburg Avenue. That building will also include the second story will include 6 760 square foot, 1-bedroom, 1-bath apartments above. The townhome access for the project proposes a 20-foot driveway off of Murphy Avenue with a T turnaround and a 20-foot private driveway for the 5 townhomes on that side. Trash enclosure and recycling center are also located at the end of the townhomes access road, and each townhome has a one car garage and 1 tandem space on the driveway. 20-foot driveway off of Healdsburg Avenue is proposed, providing access to the rear 22 space parking lot for the mixed use building. And half of those parking spaces are tuck under spaces for the walkway above. Other than that, I will conclude my report there. There's a lot of information within the staff report, but I'll hand it over to Kathy Austin, who's here to answer any additional questions. And she does have a presentation PowerPoint to provide to the board today.
Sounds good. Thank you, John. And Kathy, just before we get into that, anybody have questions for staff before we get into the presentation?
Just a clarification question. So in the staff report, staff was for the site plan was preferring a driveway all the way through the property rather than these kind of 2 separate dead ends. That's just clarifying that. Is that right?
Correct. Yes. So when we had the preliminary or pre-application conference with the applicant, the original design was to have a continuous driveway through the site. Once the applicant got some feedback and started to do some of the grading work, they found that proposal may not work the best. So the new site plan that's included in the package as far as the civil plans is what's being proposed. But I'll let Kathy and her team kind of go into detail a little bit more on why they decided to go that route and whatnot. So
yeah, thank you. And then just a question, we were trying to have a joint meeting of the DRB and Planning Commission, which I assume just didn't happen because the schedules couldn't work out.
correct.
So they haven't seen it yet, that right?
Yeah, so this was originally supposed to go to last week's Planning Commission meeting. However, The applicant was ill, so we had to push that to the January 10th meeting. So the planning commission will be seeing this proposal next year on their January 10th meeting and providing input. But we didn't want to, we just wanted to keep the project moving forward as far as the preliminary reviews go, to get at least the DRB's initial response to the project.
Right. Okay. And I just have one other question, John. So the zoning for this, the Healdsburg Avenue side especially, requires commercial spaces on the ground floor. Is that right?
Oh, yes. The parcel itself is a split zone. So the front half of the lot that faces Healdsburg Avenue is zoned commercial. And then the back half of the lot is zoned R7 multifamily residential. So that's why they're proposing the commercial building up there. And there are some other options that Kathy's brought up, but we'll get into those in her presentation. But yes, currently the way it's zoned right now, it would have to have commercial on the ground floor as a permitted by right. They could do housing on the ground floor, but that would require a use permit within that zone.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Gotcha. And I just had one question for you, John. I didn't do the math. 22 parking spaces for the Healdsburg Avenue. Is that the minimum parking required?
Yes.
Okay.
I think it's 21.7 or something like that. It's right
at that threshold.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know it was 9 for the residential, and I'm sure I can do the math quickly for the commercial, 1 per 300, right?
And street parking along Healdsburg cannot be considered.
Only for affordable housing projects.
Gotcha. Okay. Any other questions of staff before we have our applicant?
There was the previous project next to it, still incomplete, but there's looked like a residential component still adjacent to Healdsburg Ave. And am I assuming that incorrectly, or how does that work? I know there's the big kind of box building there on the corner of Murphy and Healdsburg Ave, but right there next to it looks like a little Craftsman style residential
Single family.
Yeah, is that an actual commercial unit on the ground floor?
Is that? Let me pull up.
Yeah, because that is a single family home, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Or this one here.
Correct.
Correct to which one? Sorry.
Your cursor's right on it. Yeah.
Yeah. So this was part of the project. It's a mixed use development. So the commercial aspect is up front here. Mm-hmm. And then there is a single family residence on this back part of the lot.
Okay. Perfect. Thanks. That helps.
All right. Any other staff questions? All right. Seeing none, why don't we turn it over to our applicant. Kathy, do you have a presentation for us?
I do. And John, am I allowed to share my screen for the PowerPoint? Okay, let me, if you don't mind, I'll go ahead and get that up and then I'll do introductions.
Sounds great.
Okay, I think what I have to do is open it first, just a second.
Kathy, do you want me to address the driveway, or will that come up logically?
That'll come up. Well, that'll come up in just a minute.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's see. I am not used to doing the screen share too much, so okay, good. Here we go.
There we go.
Yeah, let me get it as a slide. The slideshow. So can you all see that? Does that show up?
Yep.
Okay, good. Well, it's nice to see some familiar faces. apologize. My voice isn't quite right. I had laryngitis last week, which is why I had to postpone our hearing. I could only whisper. And so if I need to sneeze during this presentation, please forgive me. I have that RSV thing that's going around.
It's nasty.
Yeah. So with me here today is our civil engineer, Paul Peck, our landscape architect, Sandy Reed, and John Meserve, our arborist. I'm afraid our owner had a family emergency and had to take care of it and wasn't able to be with us here. He will be here for the planning commission meeting, but I'll be taking notes, and of course this is recorded and he plans to watch it after. So, but my apologies that he wasn't able to be here with us. So let me minimize something here so I can see this. This is the split zoning that you see here. The commercial in the front and the residential in the back. The Beatty Court homes are back here. And so it made it an interesting challenge to meet both zoning requirements. And this is similar to what you just saw. This is the project beside us. This is the part that is mixed use, and this is the part that's designated high density residential. We have a very odd rear property line here, and I'll point that out a little bit. Some of these trees appear to be on our property, but they're actually on the Beatty Court property, but we're proposing to save as many trees as possible in this area. As you can see, it's a very heavily wooded site. It's also a very steep site, and that is what makes this a very challenging site. This is a photograph along Murphy. As you can see right here, there's an asphalt sidewalk. I asked city staff when I met them, I said, I'm assuming you want us to put a regulation sidewalk along here, and that would mean the removal of this tree. And they said, yes, absolutely. So I just wanted to be upfront about that this tree is going to have to go in order to meet the standard road and sidewalk conditions that the city has. My partner Mark here is standing at the driveway that goes into the existing residence right now. And these are the views from the east and the west. And this tree right here is one that we are proposing to remove because it's nearly collapsed. But obviously it's a very wooded site, and we understand that. So in your staff report, I had done all of my drawings in a flip of this because I was looking from Healdsburg Avenue up, but our civil engineer, as always, has the arrow on the north. And so I've rotated my drawings to match his. And so I apologize if there's any confusion. This was what I went into the city staff with for preliminary review. And the reason I'm showing you this is these are 1 foot contours. So you can see it's an extremely steep slope right through here. This is the existing driveway and the existing building. This part of the site is more level, and this part relatively is more level. And so we are proposing our buildings to be on the more level portion of the site. So you can see that we're proposing some townhomes here, and then the mixed use building here. Now, originally, I felt it made sense to have a driveway go all the way through. I'm going to let Paul talk at length about why this was so difficult. We worked together closely for over a week trying to make this pass-through driveway work. It wound up being extremely challenging with very high retaining walls, a lot more off-hauling of soil, impacting more trees, depressing this road, which impacted the back here and so forth. So he's going to go into that. But this is what I've shown your staff initially. We've had to remove 1 townhome. Originally, this was 16 townhomes. This width across the southern back part just couldn't work. We needed more room for stormwater mitigation, and setbacks just didn't work. So we did remove 1 unit from what we previously met with. I'm going to turn this over to Paul. This is one of his drawings, but it shows in the darker lines the trees we're proposing to save versus the ones that we're going to remove. And he's going to talk a bit about the grading, and then I'll have map of the from the tree report. And then I'm also going to come back to the architecture to discuss, and then we'll open it up for your questions and your comments, if Chair, if that's okay with you.
That sounds good.
Okay, so Paul, you want to take it over from here, and just tell me next and I'll change the slide. And you may be muted.
Is it possible for me to share my screen?
Oh,
Just for
I
a
don't
minute?
know. How do I do that? I stop share, correct, John?
Yeah, let me make Paul.
Okay.
Paul, you should be good to go.
Okay. Okay, so these are actually the emails that kind of we sent back and forth between Kathy and I. And this was us trying to make this drive aisle work. Because of that, 10 to 12 foot differential between the lower portion and the upper portion, almost, all of that elevation had to be made up along this short edge after we got past the driveway. And what it caused was this tree right here, we were cutting about 4.5 feet at the, at the trunk of the tree. This is a 12-inch oak. And also that was including a 4-foot retaining wall along here where we'd be, we're in the drip line of these two trees and cutting 4 foot, still within the drip line of the trees. In addition, because we couldn't get all the way as high as we wanted to, these 4 buildings here would require 7 stairs just to get to the bottom floor. In order to not have to eliminate all these, we really wanted to keep these trees and stay out of, keep any cut out of the root zone of these trees along this edge here. Same thing here. We had, again, we're trying to save all these trees on the backside, and we had to have these two had to be, again, 4 steps to get into the bottom floor in order to keep that bottom floor deck not cutting into the root zone of these trees. In addition, we had about a 7,000 cubic yard export on this design here. So when we looked at this, we've talked to the fire marshal, we've run this by the fire marshal. He is okay with this hammerhead as far as emergency access. So that's not an issue at all. Emergency for these buildings will be handled from Healdsburg. So we ended up with this, again, if we look at this tree where we previously had 4 foot of cut, we now have no cut at all. Essentially, we're right at the existing grade. These trees that we were cutting 4 foot within the drip the root zone. Now we're having very minimal grading at all. So these trees that we were, again, still trying to save, but was going to be questionable, are being saved. All these houses all have level driveway into the driveway, and the walkway into the bottom floor are level, still allowing us to not get into the root zone of these trees here. And these two that we had previously had a 2 foot step now are level as well. In addition, again, now we still have about 1,000 yards of export with this design here. But again, it's like 6,000 yards better than it was. Is there anything else I wanted to talk about? I think that's mainly it. This access was going to be 12% on the inside for a significant distance. It was going to be a very difficult road to both drive on and to walk on. So I think that's all I have. Is there anything I missed,
Paul,
Kathy?
When we go back to my slides, Paul, I want to talk about permeable paving versus impervious paving. So if I can share the screen again.
Sure, I will.
We'll go back to that.
See if I can figure out how to stop.
I think it's
share.
the red thing up there. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I hope that was clear. Anybody have any questions about that.
I think there may be a lot of questions, Paul. Why don't we
Okay.
go through it? Chair Luthen, is it all right if we go through our presentation and then have questions?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay, all right, thanks. So let me go to the next. Okay, so this is, I wanted to show you the sections. If you can see them at the bottom of your screen. These are showing that we're stepping our retaining wall here, and there will be landscaping in that. And this portion will be larger and opportunity for some significant trees in there. We are also have brought on Sandy Reed as our landscape architect since I originally put in our package, and she is working on some larger trees to help recapture some of the tree canopy in the site. And we'll give her an opportunity to answer any of your questions about that as well. But we recognize that we're taking out a lot of trees and we're going to have to do quite a bit of mitigation, and we're going to try to put as much on site as possible. But we've also been discussing with Sandy and Paul is going to work with city staff on what we can propose as being permeable versus what has to be impermeable paving. In my report, I've suggested that we make all of our driveways permeable concrete. It may be better to actually have the driveway be permeable and have the individual driveways solid, but this is something that we're working on. We want to find out what is the best approach. Some cities are not allowing driveways to be permeable because of the infiltration of oils into the soil, as opposed to dealing with them in a vegetated soil type situation. But we're very conscious of the fact that there's a lot of paving, and we want to try to get the best solution possible. And we're open to all different avenues to decide how to do that. And I just wanted to mention it. This slide in particular, you can maybe see the paving a little bit more. And what's the these hatching lines that are little dots, those are the stormwater mitigation areas. They're also between driveways in the townhome area and along here, but there's a lot of opportunity for planting in those areas as well. So when we come back with our formal submittal, we'll have a more developed, certainly a developed landscape plan, but also another plan for how we're dealing with permeability of the paving. This is the plan that shows all the trees on the site, and I've color coded them based on John Meserve's ranking. The ones that are in green, he's ranked 4. Ones in yellow are ranked 3, and the ones that are red are ranked 1 and 2. The lower the number, the poorer the specimen. And he'll be available to answer your questions. Some of the trees clearly are not in great shape that we're removing. Some are questionable, but a lot of them are in good health, and we will have to mitigate for all of this. This one I'm hoping to save because we're no longer having a sidewalk here, and it has survived the creation of the retaining wall here, and so I'm hoping we can actually save this one right over here. So this is my site plan that shows the trees that we're proposing to save, some of the trees that we're proposing to plant. It's also, I'm attempting to show you the area on the roofs where we can have solar, or in the blue areas. On the townhomes, I have a portion of the roof that is flat, so I can locate the water heater, the HVAC, and the solar in an area which won't be visible. It is possible that because of some of the shading of trees, we might have to move some solar onto the roofs areas. We'll work with Sol Data to analyze the best approach and how much solar is required. And my attempt here is to show that we're trying to basically hide them where we can. The other issue is that all of these are facing north, whereas if it's flat, they can be angled to be more towards the west and catch more sun. Same thing on the commercial building. We have a lot of area to work with in terms of the mechanical area and the solar, but it'll all be out of sight for people on the ground. And these areas where I had previously said we could have ground covers and native grasses, we're hoping that we can do more than that. We can have larger trees and so forth, and we're going to work with Sandy on that. This is just the straight elevation. And what I wanted to bring up now that happened in the last 2 days is we got a really nice public comment letter from Kate Haug pointing out that the city needs housing. They don't really need more commercial space. And I wrote to John Jay and I said, I completely agree. Is there any way that we could convert the commercial spaces to residential? And he mentioned that your Habitat for Humanity did that opposite Safeway, and that it was possible to switch from commercial space to residential space through the use permit process. I've spoken to our owner and he's very open to that. And so I would love to hear the board's thoughts on that. Obviously, it would change the elevation somewhat on the lower level of the commercial building. It would become residential. However, I would keep the overall aesthetic, but just make sure I have operable windows for bedrooms and so forth. So happy to talk about that later, but this is something that came up just Monday and Tuesday. So I don't have anything to show you. I would be coming back with designed areas in here for residential, and that would add to the amount of accessible apartments that are available on site. The floor plans for the, I'm sorry, here's the color rendering of what I'm proposing. I'm proposing using some natural cedar along with cement board siding to really soften and give warmth to the building, but stay with a more contemporary look. These windows on the north side are canted in a way to avoid the hottest of the summer setting sun. So it's a passive solar approach to that window. Everyone has some semi-private private area for each apartment above. It would become more of a challenge for providing private area to residences on the lower level, and that's something that I'd have to look at and work with staff on as well if we go that route. These are the townhomes. You can see on the roof area here that I have a flat area for the PV and the mechanical. Each apartment, similar to what I did with the Barlow Crossing townhomes, has its own bathroom so that you could have 2 unrelated people living together or an adult child with a parent. It adds more flexibility than just having 1 bathroom and 2 bedrooms on the 2nd floor. You can see though that it's very constrained on the 1st floor. It would be really impossible to make them accessible, purely accessible with a bathroom and bedroom on the 1st floor, which is why we're proposing all the accessible units to be on the Healdsburg Avenue side. And this is my last slide. It's an elevation of, again, the same materials that we have in the front, but varying them somewhat to break up the facade. The buildings do step down the hill, follow the hill. We make up the difference in the stairs up to the unit. The garages are lower down where we're trying to maintain the root zone of the trees behind, but the road can't go up high enough. So the intention is to save all of the trees that we can. And actually, I want to go back to the site plan. Can you follow my cursor? This is actually our property line. It's this strange angle. But the fence line actually comes somewhat onto our property and then onto the Beatty Court property. So the trees that appear to be on our site, some of them are actually on the other property. And of course, we're taking great care to keep those as well. I've suggested to my client that he might want to speak to the owners of these properties about doing an easement to allow our units to use this area as part of their rear yards in exchange for a nice new fence all along the fence line. And that's something to be worked out later, but we are at the minimum setback here to our property line, even though it's really more than double that to the fence line. Okay, that concludes my presentation, and I would like to ask if John Meserve or Sandy Reed had anything you want to add before we go into the question area? John, it looks like you might have something.
You know, I don't. You guys have all seen the report I generated. It's pretty typical. We've been on site, documented all the trees, tagged everything, numbered it, and mapped it, and you have all that information. So I think the site plan speaks for itself in terms of trees, and I'm here and happy to answer any questions that you might have.
And Sandy, I just wanted to offer to you if you wanted to say anything or just be available to answer questions.
So was that directed to me? I couldn't quite hear.
Oh, I'm sorry, Sandy. I was just asking if you had anything you wanted to add or if you just wanted to be able to answer questions as they came up.
Yeah, I think you mentioned about you really trying to put in some large specimen trees on the project. And to, you know, that was kind of the first thought that I had, as I haven't really had a chance to look at the project, you know, carefully. So that's the only thing I can say right now. I think, like you said, you know, we might have to work on permeability or not on the materials. So.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Sandy just joined us in the last week, and so she really hasn't had a chance to go over the project in depth yet. Sandy and I worked together on the Barlow, and we had a great time working on that. And I know you all are familiar with her work in Sebastopol, and I think she's going to be a great addition to the team. So, Chair.
Thank you about that, by the way.
So, Chair, I'm available to answer questions here. Your comments. I've got my pad of paper. I'm going to take all your notes down, and would love to leave it over to you now and see what you have to say.
Sounds good. Thanks for the presentation. Board members, questions of Kathy and her team? Anybody have questions? If not, I've got a couple.
Okay.
It's nice to see the site sections. That was something I was hoping to see in the package. And if I understand it correctly, we've got kind of a stepped retaining wall running east-west down the middle, total about 10 feet tall, something like that.
Yes,
split
that's
between
correct.
the upper and the lower lot.
Correct.
All right, just wanted to clarify that, make sure I was understanding that correctly. And that's where your off haul's coming, right? To cut that front lot down.
Yes, and that's to provide the minimum amount of parking that's required, that 22 parking spaces. We're very constrained in the north-south direction. We're really compact, and yeah, that is what's causing the off-haul. It's a very challenging site there.
It is. It's you know, it's deceiving when you drive by it because there's so many trees. You don't really notice that it's sloping pretty significantly, especially at the back of the site there. It really kind of ramps up. I had a question about the I know you probably haven't really thought much about this, but if you were to go fully residential, would your just a kind of knee-jerk reaction, would it be townhomes across Healdsburg, or would you go with two-story, more apartment style?
Actually, Ted, I was thinking of keeping the building looking almost exactly the same way it is and keeping the same footprint, but revise. I might bring the second floor down 2 feet because I was keeping a 12-foot clearance on the shortest portion, and it winds up being 14 feet of clearance in the other end. And I think I could afford to come down a couple of feet. It kind of depends on your input, honestly, because I know here I live in Bend, Oregon now, and I work with the Central Area Advisory Board. And what we've done is we recognize housing is really needed, and our zoning code is written similarly with mixed use having commercial on the first floor. And we revised it to be commercial ready so that it could be residential, but could convert to commercial at some future date, should it make sense to do so. And so the intention there is to keep the free ceiling height 12 feet, assuming that a commercial space would need that kind of room. But that it's allowed to be residential in the meantime to meet the need. And I would be willing to do that kind of an approach if that was desired. I wasn't really thinking of completely redesigning that building. I was thinking of working with the footprints that I have in the commercial portion. We stepped in two places because we're following the slope. And so we could do, for instance, three bedroom apartments. I could do a couple studios and some 3-bedroom apartments. I could create variety there. And I was really curious what your feedback was on even the idea of going residential, if we should keep it looking like it could be commercial at a future date, all those kinds of things. So we're really open. But, you know, I think that the need is clearly for more residences and less commercial space.
Yeah. And I think the idea of what you classified as commercial ready probably makes a lot of sense for this part of town specifically. You know, if the need does arise at some point for more commercial space, you know, we've seen that ebb and flow over time, right? We've seen demand for commercial be very high, and then now it's very low, and back and forth. You know, seems like there's always a demand for housing. So I think that might be an interesting approach. Any other questions of our applicant here?
I have a few. Can I jump in?
Yeah, go Melissa. Yeah, please do.
Hi, Kathy. It's nice to see you. It's been a while.
Nice to see you.
It's so exciting to see a housing project with some density come into town. So this is awesome. And I would be super supportive of seeing this go all residential. I actually asked John earlier today, like what the commercial vacancy rate is. And then I called the Chamber of Commerce and they don't have data on it, and they agree that they absolutely must have data on this, but you can just drive around town and see that there's plenty of available commercial space that is not used right now. So I would love to see it be housing instead if we could do. I'm curious, what would that do to your parking count?
I actually think it makes it a little bit better. John could, I don't know. I didn't do the calculations, but especially the way that the state is moving towards reducing parking and your new housing element, I think it actually would certainly meet it, if not make it a little better.
Awesome. The one thing I noticed about the site, especially, you know, your application references young families, it would be terrific to see some dedicated open green space that was more community driven, and some park-like component. If we could find a way, I mean, you've done an excellent job of shoehorning in a lot of program into a pretty challenging site. I walked the site or over to the site this afternoon, and that slope is no joke. To that extent, Paul, I'm curious how, you know, this 10-foot retaining wall, it doesn't appear that the adjacent retaining wall on the adjacent site is that tall, and it could just be from a distance I can't see. How do we anticipate these two things meeting up?
That's a good question. There is a stairs in between, which kind of break them up and make them not meet. I think that, you know, again, as we get into, I believe that wall is also a segmental, like a geogrid type of wall. So I again, this project, I think when that project got started, this project was not anticipated, but in what we're basically would be doing, I believe, is just raising that wall a foot or two, and that may require that wall to be taken down, but since it's segmental, you can use all the same material and potentially a little more geogrid in order to be able to build it up a little higher. Honestly, I haven't looked at that edge super close. Go ahead, Kathy, you have a comment?
Well, I was the architect on that one, Melissa, so I can speak to it a little bit more than Paul because I was involved with that. It's about a 4-foot retaining wall, but the reason it's so much less is that we really stepped that site. So the commercial building on the corner is low, but there's a retaining wall behind it that goes up, and so the parking is up another couple of feet, and then it angles up a bit, and then we have that retaining wall, and also the amount of slope isn't as great overall on that corner as it gets further into the site that we're working on now. I don't anticipate, honestly, that we would have to do anything to the existing wall, but I'm going to defer to Paul on that. But my intention is to have stairs coming from the upper area down between the two parking lots, basically, and the house that's the little house that's there, and then it gets leveled by our new commercial building so that there's easy access from above to below. And
It'd be great to have access to the Healdsburg side, especially that nice little bus stop that's there. It'd be good to connect those
and
things.
The bus stop, of course, will work with the bus people to design it and make sure that we are, working with them on that. But we're happy to have a bus stop right in front. To me, this is such an ideal location for this kind of housing because you can walk to Parkside, you can walk to Brookhaven, you can walk to the park at Brookhaven, you can go to Fiesta Market, you can walk to Safeway. I mean, you can walk to everything, and you've got a bus stop right in front. So, I'm all for disconnecting the cost of parking to an apartment so that if somebody doesn't have a car, they're not subsidizing people who do have a car. And that's something we're working on up here in Motown. So if I can reduce some of the parking to create more green space, Melissa, I'll look at that. But I'm also very cognizant of my client wanting to have sufficient parking for the people who are living there. And so it's kind of a balance. And it's difficult to find much space to have a common green area there. The thing is, you are really close to Brookhaven Park. I know it's not the same thing, but the playground is right there too. So yeah, I hear you, and I'll do what I can.
Thank you. Great. Yeah. I mean, people over parking for sure. I'd be curious then also if you're this retaining wall that's going in, and Paul, maybe this is something that you can speak to. Did you look at the road access from the west side versus the east side? I mean, it looks like there's a 7-foot grade change along Healdsburg from one end to the other. So that could mitigate some of the climb needed if we wanted to create through access through the site.
Well, it has to do with locating your access far away from the intersection. I'm going to let Paul talk to that, but are you talking about putting the driveway between the existing building that's finishing up construction and
Correct.
ours? Right. I think it's too close to the intersection of Murphy and Healdsburg for Caltrans to allow us to put it there. I put it as far away from the intersection because of the queuing of traffic that happens at that intersection. It's best to be as far east as possible.
All right, so I'm just going to look through my laundry list here. Apologies, the dogs decided to take this moment, of course. And have you spoken with Recology or the tracks about the turnaround and making sure that the backup is okay?
Yeah, Paul, you did.
I'm sorry, you said the fire marshal? Yes, I talked to the fire marshal. He's seen
trash. Sorry, trash.
Oh, trash.
Oh, trash. We haven't talked to trash.
If it works for a fire truck, it usually works for the hauler, but that is one of the first things we have to do is talk to the hauler. But the kind of I guess we could put that up, but just imagine, if you will, we showed 2 arcs, 2 radii. One is, to provide pedestrian sidewalk, but it's going to be flush with the driveway and rolled curbs so that it's easy for a fire truck or the trash hauler to make that turn. But we will be definitely talking to them, just like we also talked to the post office about where they want the gamed mailboxes. So this is preliminary, but generally speaking, if it works for a fire truck, it works for the trash hauler. But my other option was to put it right on Murphy, and I figured that was kind of a no-no. I mean, and yeah, it's a tough spot to find the trash.
Always the evil to try to solve that. Something that I'd love to see, if this stays commercial, the stair access to a commercial property is not as welcoming as a street level or grade level, especially if we're thinking about the mobility challenges. It feels a little punitive to have them go to the back of the building from the public way. I understand we're dealing with a super challenging site, but if there's a way to re-engineer perhaps it's a continuous front porch or, more of a front facing ramp so that it's not, sending folks to the back of the building for access from the public street.
Yeah, a continuous ramp might work, Melissa. The reason it's raised is it saves 2 more feet from the retaining wall in the back. The retaining wall would have to go to 12 feet if we lowered the building to be flush with the sidewalk along Healdsburg. So it was a decision that we made to deal with the stormwater at the back of the building and make that all flush with the parking, because of course I had to have the accessible parking flush with the elevator and the sidewalk in the back. But your idea of a continuous It's more paving, but it could work. It was not my ideal choice. My first thought was to be flush with Healdsburg Avenue, but when Paul and I started working on it, we realized, oh, we have to raise this to lower that and make all the stormwater go where we needed it to go. So it is something that we did consider. I agree with you, having stairs at the front isn't great. At the same time, my thought was for people who were mobility challenged, if they might drive to the site and park in the parking lot, in which case the level entrance was there. But I hear you. Again, it all comes down to the fact that it's such a sloped site and it was a balancing act. But your idea of like a one ramp as opposed to individual stairs could work. And we could look at that.
I think the stairs really, as it's currently designed, does lend itself more to sort of the privacy and separation of public and private for a residential component.
Mhm.
If we are going to go commercial, though, I think we really have to emphasize the transparency at the public face and at the public level. And we want to activate the street. I mean, if we're going to be pulling kind of downtown north, then we really want to
Right.
activate at the street level. And right now it feels like there's not a lot of, I would say we could be a little bit more overt with the glazing, you know, maybe a little less set back, a little less elevated, to make it more activated at the public level. It's really destination retail that is being created. And I think that's probably contrary to what we want to see.
I
Yeah,
hear you. I think that's a really good point. There's going to be a different approach depending on whether we go with the residential or the commercial. But I do think the overall building is going to remain the same. So it could convert to commercial at some later date if we are residential.
So
You
my-
probably redo the whole frontage of the window areas at that time.
Yeah,
Like-
I would encourage more Oh, sorry, Paul, why don't you go ahead?
Like, just like Kathy was saying, that if we were to drop that building down, the whole parking lot would have to come down with it. So that whole front area would drop 2 feet and that would all be export. And so that would be a bunch of trucks hauling dirt off. Again, everybody knows kind of what that looks like. Not only is it cost, but it's, greenhouse gases and that kind of stuff. But it's again, it's doable. It's just dollars and greenhouse gases and traffic and that kind of stuff. Additional.
I guess I'm asking for a design solution to make a more hospitable front door for those who need the.
I understand. I hear
Yeah.
you.
Cool.
Taking notes,
Sweet.
Melissa.
Sweet. Great. Then if we are going to continue with the same footprint, I think the second story is reading very top heavy. So maybe there's some more articulation, more transparency, more glazing, something that can be done to lighten that up, especially from the street level, looking at that setback, which is quite shallow, like that kind of solid mass over you is going to feel quite oppressive at the pedestrian scale. So I'd love to see something a little bit more articulated. Maybe change of materiality, something that could give it a little more change in plane would be great. And are these units intended for rent or for sale?
The apartments are definitely rental. The townhomes, generally speaking, I do them as subdivisions, so there's an opportunity for ownership at some point. The economics are right now that it makes more sense for the owner to hold on to them and rent them out. And unfortunately, the cost to sell them now is so high that it would become a pretty exclusive development if it was all for sale versus being more affordable as apartment rentals. So I'm pretty sure that the owner is going to rent them out. But that doesn't mean that over time there wouldn't be an opportunity for ownership. It gives it the most flexibility to do it that way.
That's great. But these are not affordable housing. It's not
No,
affordable housing.
No,
Yeah.
we're not deed restricted. I mean, there will be deed restricted units within it because of the inclusionary requirement. So there will be. We haven't chosen what those are yet or worked at what level. There's a negotiation that we can do to figure out what makes the most sense. I read an interesting article recently about a gentleman who owns some property in Sebastopol that's been working with Section 8. And I think that that's something that I could suggest to my client that they consider to help with affordability, but it's not deed restricted, but working with Section 8 applicants might be something that could happen there.
That'd be great. Yeah, that'd be terrific. And then as you start to look at the photovoltaic service, it just seems pretty undersized for the need. And I was curious, like, what is the goal for sustainability on this site? Are we looking for net zero? Are we trying to be completely covering our need? Is there on-site battery storage?
The way the code is written now is a really specific number, and I'd have to go back and look at what that is. It's what we covered. If you check out the Barlow Crossing townhomes and look at the roofs, that's how much solar, and they're on both sides. I was concerned about the fact that a lot of the roofing is on the north side, but it appears that that can still work. So you may be seeing the panels, but you won't be seeing the water heater. Will probably be, instead of going tankless now, we're probably not going to be having gas, we'll be electric. And so we'll probably do heat pump water heaters and heat pump. Obviously, we might be using mini splits. That's probably what we're going to be using. We're not going for net zero, but the newest, as of January, we have the new code cycle.
Sure.
And so the new green building code tier 1 is what we're going to be working with. And generally speaking, we look to go 10% above base Title 24. So we will be exceeding code. I can't tell you by how much, and we may be having to have more solar than I'm indicating. I agree with you. I think on the mixed use building, we probably have plenty of roof to have it without it being seen. But on the townhomes, you might be seeing some of the solar.
Have you looked into covered parking with PV, or perhaps some sort of green element in covered parking for those commercial spots?
No, we haven't. We could on the exposed. I mean, half the parking is already tucked under, so obviously we can't do there. But on the others, we could talk to the client about that if that's one good way of doing it. The thing is, with the townhomes, they're on individual lots, and so for the townhomes, they wouldn't be able to take advantage of any of the solar that's on another lot that's, you know, on the parking lot. That would have to go towards the apartment portion, and I think they have enough roof area already to serve what's needed. So for in a subdivision situation, the solar has to be on the house that it's serving on that lot, and so we would just maximize it on the roof area of the townhomes.
Yeah, it would be great if we could find another way to improve upon that, even if it's at the project level, not at the individual level.
Yeah, well, I mean, we are going to have at least 40% EV charging stations, and so those could be underneath a solar canopy layer in the parking lot for one thing. So
Beautiful.
That's one of the things that we could look at.
And if not that, then some sort of greening so that we could get some more green back onto this project.
Yeah, and we'll work with Sandy on that for sure, as much as we can.
Awesome. I think that's it for me so far. I think I've gone through the laundry list. Thanks, Kathy. That was great.
All right. Thanks, Melissa. Anybody else have questions, comments? All right. Seeing none. Thank you, Kathy and team, for the presentation. Oh, let's see. That was my next step. Any members of the public have anything to say? And I see a hand going up from Carol.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Well, hello. My name is Carol Capria, and I live on Healdsburg Avenue, right across the street from the proposed development. And I want to thank everyone for the presentation, for the comments and the questions, and also for inviting me to this meeting as a neighbor. I received a postcard in the mail telling me about the planning department meeting and this design review board meeting. I just wanted to give a little history in terms of how the process has been for myself and my husband in terms of the corner development that is hopefully almost completed. I did walk the property with Kenyon Webster when it was first, when it first came up, that it was being developed, but we were never notified about that project in any way, shape, or form. We never received anything, and we were quite surprised. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on that because it's in the past, but that property had been for sale for many, many, many years. And then it wasn't until it had gotten pre-approved design approval for what it is now, or close to what it is now, did it sell right away. So it's funny because when I walked the property with Kenyon, I had said, oh my gosh, and then there's this property right next door, this beautiful piece of property that is, yes, indeed, quite forested. Someone, this particular developer or someone could want to buy this piece and then add on, or just then continue to develop. So it's come to pass, and yes, we need housing big time. And, you know, we're all for it. We totally support it. I'm very happy to hear about the commercial. Well, for one, the letter that, is it Kathy Hogg or Haig wrote about the commercial spaces being so, you know, not, there are just so many empty commercial spaces around, and I don't know what's going to happen across the street with those commercial spaces. So I would definitely support the idea of moving them over to residential units to add to the living spaces for families and folks. The other thing about those units right on Healdsburg Avenue, I'm not sure about the setback. I haven't studied any of the, you know, the blueprints or anything like that, any of the design. But I know on the one that's already on the corner there, it does not appear to have much of a setback on those commercial units. There has been a green fence up there for many years, so we have not been able to really see or tell if there's going to be any landscaping done or any trees or anything, any kind of buffer between that building and the sidewalk. Right now, it looks like nothing. It looks like no buffer. It looks like total sidewalk building. So we'll see how it moves forward. So a couple of things. After the high schools consolidated, you can only imagine. I work in town, and I could walk or I could drive. And yes, the location is ideal. We walk everywhere. We couldn't walk to everything. It's just perfect. I used to be able to drive to work in about 3 minutes, maybe 4. And now the traffic in front of our house between 8 and maybe 8:45 or 8:30 is stopped. It is stopped, bumper to bumper traffic. It is so unreal. I mean, I don't know, maybe some of you know that, maybe some of you don't. During the pandemic, I was working from home for 2 years. And one day I looked out my front window and I saw all this traffic, and I was like, what the heck happened here? There must have been an accident. I mean, I knew the schools were consolidating, but I just did not anticipate that all of that traffic would happen. And with the bike lanes and all the rest, it's really a nightmare. People are nice enough to let me out in the morning. You know, they're stopped and they see me coming out of Dufranc and making a left-hand turn, and they're kind. They're kind enough to let me in. Now, the traffic on Murphy is another story with no turning lanes there. If you're coming out of Murphy and you want to travel east to downtown, sometimes you're stuck behind one line or a car that is taking up the whole lane, and you don't know if they're turning right or they're turning left, and if they're turning right and they're in the middle, then you can't turn left. And so the traffic then becomes backed up on Murphy. And I don't know if it's been discussed or if it is even going to happen, for a turning lane to be suggested for Murphy so that the traffic, there would be a much better traffic flow happening coming out of Murphy if there's enough room for 2 lanes. There is totally enough room to do that. And then, of course, the turning onto Dufrank and the turning onto Murphy, it's been ever since Caltrans came and redid the bike lanes and redid the lines and all the rest. There's been a lot of confusion in that area with near accidents and accidents happening. So I don't know if a traffic study is in the works for this project in terms of congestion and safety. So that would be a question that I have. Let's see, I'm happy to hear about, the landscaping that will take place with the new project and some of the, I forget how you call them, Kathy, the larger specimens of trees that you'll try to incorporate those into the plans. That would be great. I really would appreciate having all of the greenery that we see from our house. It's just been really wonderful to have
Carol,
all those. Yes.
Could I ask you to kind of wrap it up here? Give us a quick summary.
Absolutely. I wasn't sure if I've been used to speaking in front of the council, so I don't know if there's a ding or a 3-minute. I wasn't sure. So
no, we're not. With only a couple speakers, we're not hardcore on timing. So, but if you could kind of wrap it up, that would be great.
Okay. All right. Let me just check my notes as real quickly. So I also would want to support the reduced parking, the more green space. I'm glad to hear that some people have walked the property, and it would be great if everyone could walk the property because it really is quite a beautiful show of trees. Very low demand for commercial. Checking my notes, going through here. Parking affordable. Oh yes, on the housing versus affordable housing. Because it's not affordable housing, I'm not clear on the number of units that need to be, or if any need to be affordable housing in terms of the development. I think Kathy was referring to Section 8, or that possibly maybe some need to be affordable housing, and I wanted to know how many of those units would be designated for affordable, and whether, if you don't know at this time, whether that would be apartments or townhouses or both. Okay, yes, I guess I'll just close it for now, and I'm not sure if my questions get answered now or at the planning department meeting, or how it works.
Yeah, I think a couple of them might be able to be answered now, but we really appreciate your input and your thoughts. I think traffic is an issue in town, and the turning in and out of this project, or just turning in and out of Murphy, I think is a bit of a challenge. I'm not sure that this is going to dramatically affect it, but it's not going to reduce it by any means, and I'm not sure anything is. And appreciate your comments on housing versus commercial. John, just to the affordability, affordable housing, will a percentage of this be required to be affordable?
The inclusionary requirements, there is a percentage that the project would have to meet based off of whatever income level that they're set at. And that's all within our inclusionary code section. I don't have it in front of me right now.
Yeah.
But if it's 120% of AMI, it's X percentage of the units need to fit that requirement. I will note that on the traffic part, that intersection there, the Healdsburg and Murphy, has been identified as a potential spot within town that would have a signal put in. So that is, the city has identified that as a kind of
challenging intersection.
that receives a lot of complaints. So that is one of the other ones that we're looking at doing. And then there's up a little bit further north along 116 where Covert is, changing that kind of intersection there to either be a three-way or some sort of roundabout intersection to help mitigate some of the traffic up there. So like you said, Ted, it's not going to solve all of the traffic issues, but some sort of light in there could help with the amount of queuing that does happen with no signal there currently.
Yeah, and those things are always a trade-off. It'll reduce the risk coming out of Murphy, but it'll back traffic up in both directions as a result of it on the highway. So
correct, and as far as and then as far as traffic study stuff goes, that we would go through and determine what kind of CEQA level for this project moving forward would be, and that some of those CEQA level determinations include traffic studies and stuff like that for this specific project. Typically, we don't determine that in a preliminary review until we get a full complete design in front of us, and then we'll make that determination. So that could be something that is done later on as well.
Yeah, and that probably will fall under the umbrella of the Planning Commission, not necessarily this board.
Correct. Yes, the Planning Commission would deal with that, and then they would also. So there's a possibility to reduce the amount of parking for a project at the Planning Commission level. So, if there is a need for parking spots to be reduced, to add in those green spaces or something like that, that is a request that the applicant can make to the Planning Commission, or a recommendation that staff can make based off of input from even the board here.
So Carol, in response to your questions, a lot of those are Planning Commission issues, traffic and those sorts of things. So you might want to attend that meeting as well. And just a reminder that this is a preliminary review, so we're not making any final decisions now and today. We're just giving guidance and our general input at this point.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that. I was thinking about that as I was speaking. I mean, I wasn't sure what was appropriate for the design review board, what was appropriate for the planning. So I appreciate that. And I apologize if I talked about Planning Commission, agenda items as opposed to design review board agenda items.
It's all good stuff, and it's all stuff that we're thinking about as well. I mean, we do think about those issues, and we can give that sort of input in the preliminary review process. So it's all good at this point.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. All right, Kathy, I just saw your hand go up.
Yes, thank you, Ted. I wanted to also answer Carol's concern about landscaping and setback. Interestingly, the way that the CO is written is it's a 0 setback from the sidewalk. And I never do that because I think there should be some buffer. And so our stairs go up and they're 5 feet back, and then the building is another 5 feet back. And we have street trees proposed to work in module with the modules of the building. So there will be a setback and landscaping provided. And I know that the building next door is a sad story, but there will be landscaping between the sidewalk and that building as well when it's complete, in order for them to get their certificate of occupancy. So it will be done eventually.
Thank you. That's good news. Thank you. Good news.
Thanks for that clarification, Kathy. All right, any other members of the public wishing to speak? And I know we got some feedback via email. Did we get any additional feedback, John, since that last one you sent out to the board?
No, so the comments that are included that were sent out to the board and that are on the website for this meeting were the only public comments that we received.
Okay.
Ted, could I mention that we did go ahead and mail letters to all the property owners adjacent from our client's office, and I checked with his secretary today, and there's been no response from them either. Originally, we said in our application we were going to wait till this was done, and then when we gave our formal submittal, we would contact, but we decided it'd be best to contact people early and give them the opportunity to view this hearing. We told them the timing of the hearing as well. So we did try to reach out to the neighbors as well.
Great, thanks for doing that. All right, so let's bring it back to the board for comments. Obviously, we're preliminary review, so we are giving kind of broad brush feedback. Why don't we tackle kind of one item at a time, maybe? Some of the things that I've heard. The residential versus commercial. What is the board's thoughts? What are the board's thoughts on guidance? Do we have a preference we want to, as a team, as a group, give to this applicant in terms of moving forward, residential versus commercial?
I'd love to see it go residential.
Yeah, Lars, you're muted. I see you talking, but
You're right. I'll echo what Melissa said, that going residential for that lower floor makes a lot of sense. I would just throw out from obviously commercial ready has a certain meaning at a floor plan level, but I would advocate that from an elevational perspective and a design perspective, that it still has a commercial sense and it doesn't become a cutesy little townhouse, on that elevation.
Yeah, sounds good. Carrie, what are your thoughts on commercial versus residential?
Well, I think that was really well said by Lars. The idea of it being a residential component is wonderful. We need more housing, and I'm supportive of that general principle. But I think the notion is that the Healdsburg Ave is that corridor, and it would be nice to see it have a dual, even possible function, but also read as such. Yeah, mm-hmm. I think it really extends the long-term notion of it being a real kind of most commercial corridor. However, I'm still not opposed to it being a residential component.
All right. Marshall, what are your thoughts? And you're muted, by the way.
Can you hear me?
Yep, there you are.
Okay. My preference is seeing it as commercial long-term.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you for that. And I think my preference is the commercial ready, but residential today. And then that kind of brings us to the next thing, parking. And I guess my knee-jerk reaction to parking would be, reduce it as much as possible. If we can count the spaces along Healdsburg Avenue, I'm all for that. And if we can save a couple park spaces, and as Melissa said, get some sort of usable outdoor community space, I think that would be a very nice thing. Any other thoughts on that? Carrie, go for it.
I have a kind of question more for John or even our applicant, but is it a red zone out front? Because I think there's a actual bus stop, but almost in front of this spot as well.
There's a bike path, so there's no parking on Healdsburg, but there is parking on Murphy, but the higher part of Murphy, there's a room for about 4 spaces parallel.
Yeah, I think we'd all like to see less parking and more park per se, but how do you penalize one homeowner or one rental unit and say, sorry, you can't have a car or something? Like, it just seems like there's not really street parking enough to reduce the on-site parking, unfortunately.
Yeah, yep, that bus stop is right in front, isn't it?
Yeah, it's directly in front, but even if it wasn't, the parking has been eliminated because of the bike path,
Right.
that whole lane.
That's right. Yeah.
All right.
So
Let's
But
see.
fairly brutal parking lot in general. I mean, you're looking at, I believe it was, 12 stalls to one side, uncovered, and then the covered is still there. You're actually trying to mitigate pervious to impervious, and so you're having probably more of a depression to accept water versus shedding water. So I think what we're seeing in this application is quite a bit of hardscape, and it kind of in conjunction with your impervious to pervious calculations on sheet 15 of the submittal. It's just interesting, I mean, it's probably well pushing over the 50% would be my guess, sure, around 56,000 square feet of area, and it's pretty much almost all impervious at this point. And then this application being an impervious to pervious calculation or material choice of that matter, it's still a pretty big brushstroke in impervious. And it even looks like it, quite frankly. So even if you're an upper townhouse looking down upon over that retaining wall, you're seeing still a pretty good gray field there. So the notion of it being a PV, I just don't think that any level of landscape is really going to kind of bring character to the site based on the level of infrastructure that it's trying to support. So in that notion, it's a big program shoehorned into a very difficult site. And I think there's your challenge right there as a site development approach and overall project. It's going to be a tricky one. And I see you definitely put some consideration and thought into it as your application clearly identifies. So I'd like to thank you for that. But I think it's just it's going to be also tricky just to sort of manage the level of impact on the site with that type of program. And the trees and its calculations sort of identify that as well. You're looking at a pretty significant reduction in tree canopy. You're also having probably high impact on a lot of the trees that are still existing. It was noted in the report, which was very well written as well. So those parking is part of site development, and site development is part of this proposal. And as a whole, it's a pretty significant impact. And either something's going to give, and it's either a reduction of units or the requirements of parking. But I think pulling into that parking lot off of Healdsburg Ave, it's a death trap for me. I would never want to park in there. To try either take a left or a right out of it would be a real challenge. And I think our public comment clearly made note of that as well. So those are just general site development, site planning comments. So maybe throw out at the board or you as the application or applicant.
Yeah.
Thanks, Carrie.
Sure.
To me, it points to this sense of there's kind of a park there now, and it's going away, right? And planting a few trees along the edges is not gonna give us that character back at all. And we heard it from the neighbor, right? And we've all seen it now for years. It's this beautiful site that's with those amazing trees, and so. Yeah, can you reduce a couple units, and would that bring some of that back, or what is that formula that not trying to put so much onto this property that actually allows some of the character that we see there now to remain?
Yeah, it does feel like it is. It is shoehorned in there. I mean, especially looking at the southeast corner where that one little spur comes to an end there at unit 15. That's like, oh, that's really getting tight back there.
Yeah.
That's squeezing it in. Yeah.
The grading report, or at least the grading plan, suggests, and oh man, I had it up a minute, but it was significant slopes up to the pads. I think they're like 12 to, I saw one that was pushing to 12%. That's a pretty significant incline as an approach to a garage. Hard to park and without fighting doors. It's, so I'm just trying to understand the level of complexity, especially if I'm a resident in these units on the second floor. What am I looking down on? And it's a very graphic plan because you're clearly looking down on a graphic plan. I'm seeing a lot of hardscape.
Yeah. All right. Why don't we talk about architecture, building design? What are thoughts on the buildings themselves? Melissa made a couple comments.
I got one question. I think we asked earlier, and I'm not sure if maybe you guys aren't the right guys to answer the question, but in regards to, again, it's going to be parking lot and it's going to be drive aisle, but is like a pervious pavement, whether it be an asphalt or a pervious concrete, is that something that is used a lot and popular in Sebastopol, or is that something that's not really seen as a benefit? Do we know?
I think we're gonna need to ask staff of that,
Okay.
Paul, to be honest with you, because there hasn't been all that much development that could use it. I'm not familiar with any that actually use that in Sebastopol yet.
It's been used, my understanding, it's been used at the Florence Lofts, and it's kind of it's got a permeability to it, and I think they've tried to reduce the compaction rate with a different aggregate, to find some level of permeability. It's my understanding a lot of the dust and debris that usually collects over time clogs those pores, which generally kind of what happens. So to call it pervious or impervious, is a little tricky.
Yeah, that's my concern,
Right,
Carrie. I prefer to see almost a crown off to a vegetated swale to deal with it. And especially if over time you need to remediate it, you want to do it in a vegetated swale.
Yeah.
So, we're obviously taking in everything, all your comments, and we'll come back with what we think is the best approach. And we'll do a little bit more research on the permeability issue for sure. And I agree that there is a lot of hardscape. There's no question. We're hoping we can mitigate it to a certain degree. So we will see. I'm definitely listening to all the comments. So yeah.
Yeah. So back to building design. We start with the mixed-use building out along Healdsburg. Any thoughts and comments on design of that building? Marshall, any thoughts on that?
No.
Yeah. All right. Carrie, you were raising your hand.
Yeah, I mean, I think Melissa's made nod to it a little bit earlier, but I didn't really see much of a push and pull. Maybe on a horizontal plane, it's kind of reads pretty as a static, monochromatic building. It's a big facade to a big volume, and it reads as such as three different pieces and parts. So maybe if again there's a change in plane, I think those were the words maybe Ms. Hanley used. So that would be my overarching thought.
Yeah, sounds good. Melissa, any follow-up thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I'd also like to see just a variety in the materiality. I know this board before my time pushed back on the Habitat project and asked for something a little more interesting, change in plane, change in materiality, something with a little bit more of a modern approach. And I think all of those comments would reign true here too as well. Like I'd like to see more articulation, more interest, change in scale, especially at the pedestrian level, so that we can kind of avoid this, blockatecture kind of vibe that we're getting right now.
Yeah. Sounds good. Lars, any comments?
Let's see. Well, I'd echo that. I think to me, the front building on Healdsburg has a little more going for it. The back building, I think, is really plain and a little scary, actually. The front doors are very, these kind of caves that you pass past the garage to get to. The sort of the scale of that, the way the flat roof goes to the pitched roof in the back has a very strange sense of scale or lack of scale. I'm not sure why double hung windows would be in this kind of a project. Does look out of place. It just feels like there's that you've spent more time in the front than in the back and trying to resolve the architecture of these buildings. Yeah, and then the side elevations, which are still going to be, seen, have the sort of striping pattern. It's very flat, and it's just kind of this one stripe that's trying to give it some character or something. And those are some of my comments.
I'm curious, Lars, the car, it's very car centric, like garage out front. And, I wonder if there is an opportunity, Oregon's great for this, and putting parking at
the building next.
Lars, you're breaking up.
I think we
Yeah,
lost
you're breaking
Lars.
up. Melissa, what were you going to say about the parking?
Oh, I was going to say that, Oregon has just a great history of, especially in Portland, of putting parking behind buildings so that, the pedestrian access of the front door is just very hospitable, and, reorienting this. And maybe that's a way to concentrate some of the building on the site too. So it's less long and linear and spread out. And maybe we get a little greater density in what this thing could be, so that we're not so car centric in the design.
Well, I can explain one reason I have the cars where I have. I wanted the private outdoor space of the townhomes to be underneath the oak trees. And so if I were to switch the driveway to the back, it would be underneath the oak trees, and there would be even more looking over a parking lot for all of the homes. There's just no way, unless they turn the townhomes backwards, but that wouldn't achieve anything. Yeah, I don't think I can do what you're asking, is what I'm saying. I did look at that, and I think the trade-off for having the private outdoor space under the oaks overshadows the idea of trying to have a garage in the back. I just thought I just mentioned that I did look at that right off the get-go, and I didn't think I could make that work. So
did you look at it? Yeah, did you look at an option with putting centralizing all of the building towards the center of the site rather than breaking it up into these 3 discrete bars?
Well, the way that the zoning is for the site is divided into 2, as opposed to it's driven by the overall zoning of the site. The front part is commercial on Healdsburg Avenue, and the back part is multifamily. And so that kind of drove the 2 separate parts. I will say that there was a proposal on this site before I came involved that it was 3 stories with 2 levels of underground parking, and it took out every tree on the site, and it came in and out of Healdsburg Avenue. And it was kind of a monstrosity. Not that what I'm having isn't, I'm trying to be much more sensitive to the site, I guess is what I'm saying, instead of cutting out everything and shoving 3 stories in there. No, I never considered having one central building. To me, I felt like I wanted to give a commercial feel to Healdsburg. I felt that was a continuation of the vision for Healdsburg Avenue. And it wasn't until Monday that I thought about turning any of that into residential. And then as far as the back part, I wanted to soften and have the least massive type of housing by having townhouses as opposed to an apartment building, which is really what the R7 is probably geared towards. I don't think I'd like to throw this all out and start over, to be honest with you. I think
nobody does.
And I'd like to hear how I could make this plan work, as opposed to completely re-looking at the whole thing. But I hear you, nobody wants to throw everything out. But I do feel like I wanted to have the private outdoor space underneath those oak trees. And so the backyard is
they're so small though. They're so small, those backyards.
Yeah, but
space back there.
It is. I love having a backyard myself, and I have trees and I watch the critters, and I think it's a nice place to sit out and be, as opposed to a more urban approach, which would be a garage in the backyard and no backyard. So it's a personal preference that I have in terms of how I live, I suppose. But yeah, there's a lot of alleys in Oregon. There's a lot of alleys in Bend and not a lot of yard area.
Yeah. Lars, are you back? Did we get Lars back?
He was here for a minute and then
Yep,
popped out
then he's
again,
drunk.
so.
Okay. Yeah, and I think going back to well, we'll stay on the townhomes for now. I do agree that, you know, in elevation, I think the perception with the garages kind of snouting forward, coming down that driveway, you're really going to have a wall of garages.
Yeah.
And I agree with Lars' assessment that the doors are really going to be down these tunnels. And I get why that's happening. You've got a very narrow unit that's, you know, barely wider than your garage. So you kind of have to do that to get around the garage. But that's kind of the end result, is you have these tunnels leading to your doors. And you have this big flat roofed projecting thing coming out that is really sort of celebrating the garage, is what it feels like.
Mm-hmm.
And then that also gives you kind of that odd side elevation with the appendage. It looks like a house that's been added on to with a flat roof. And then the Healdsburg, you know, I like the ground floor of the Healdsburg elevation. I think the upper floor is feeling a little bit like a fortress or something. It feels a little funny. Maybe it's a little slot window or something. But it seems like that upper elevation could be worked and become a little more pleasant. It feels a little unwelcoming, I guess. Those are my thoughts on the buildings. Let's see, what else do we need to touch on here? Anybody else have ideas or thoughts we need to convey?
Did you have input on the landscaping or the tree approach at all? Did you have anything specific you wanted to identify?
There's not very much of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't have a lot. I mean, I do appreciate that we're keeping some old trees along the there. But yeah, in terms of landscape, there really isn't a whole lot of kind of usable space. I think Melissa mentioned it, and you know, I do like the pedestrian connector out to Healdsburg Avenue. I think that'll be nice, crosswalk and down the stairs. And then those stairs do give you an opportunity to kind of resolve the grade between you and the neighbor. I think that'll be a good thing.
I guess we have Lars back. I don't know. Lars, we lost you.
We lost you,
Sorry.
Lars. You're back.
Yeah, sorry, my internet connection went down.
And you were mid gesture when we
No.
lost you.
You're making an excellent point.
I'm sure I was, yes.
I think you were talking about the front facade of the townhomes is where we lost you.
Yeah, I think just generally it feels like the building on Healdsburg has a lot more detail and could have more to make a good streetscape, but the building at the back just felt like it isn't very resolved. There's not a lot of detail to that, and the entries next to the garages don't feel very welcoming to me. I guess dealing with the grade back there is obviously a more challenging concern, but
yeah, I think that was a good point. And I think it's also the width of the units. The units are so narrow that you kind of have to put the front door in a tunnel.
yeah, and then and with the grade there, you're gonna be entering at different heights to your neighbor. Is there a railing that's your next to you? And it feels like a shoehorn within a shoehorn.
Yeah, because it looks like you've got, I don't know, maybe 4 feet, 5 feet, something like that.
Not quite that much, no.
Yeah.
Are you talking about the steps up?
Yeah, the width of the
Well,
stoops, yeah.
Oh, the width of the, yeah, with the two together is about 10 feet, but you're right, and I've tried to have them be equal steps up, so it stays that size, but there would not need to be a separation between the two if they're at the same grade. So we're hoping to do that. So that's why I've paired the entries together to try and make it wider, because yes, it is very narrow. I agree.
Yeah.
And I can also bring the doors more forward. It just means more hallway inside, but I was trying to create sort of an in-between. I hear you.
But I think we're asking for a rethink of it, though. I mean, perhaps a more structural change to the approach of the project.
Is that just you, or is that everyone?
Everything I've heard so far.
Yeah.
I mean, you had suggested putting one building in the middle of the site. Is that
Or
what other
two,
people-
or something, just something that doesn't have such a spread out parking heavy approach to the site.
So the way that the CO is written is that 0 setback on the sidewalk, and I've given us 10 foot. I've tried to create a commercial building at the street level, but have enough to have some landscaping and street trees. And so are you saying not doing that and pushing further back and having one building sort of raised up in the middle of the site, and not having as much grading? Or I can't quite understand what you're asking for. If you could just elucidate that a bit. Carrie, I see you nodding. What is your thought on that?
Well, I think some of the information the board, at least I'll, represent, would be just a notion of the density of the program. And I think what's being asked here is to not just look at monster blocks of what's been created. It's how the blocks articulate what the site allows. And again, you've got a great team assembled, Kathy. And I think, using your team to represent the level of options. And it was great to actually see your process, because seeing the process in your presentation really helped me understand some of where you were and where you are, and then where you want to go. So for me, at least, I'm trying to look at like a little bit more of like, where can this project go? And I think that was maybe the undertone to the board, is to see what the opportunity really allows. And in relationship to grading and drainage and parking and site development, because it's all tied to the volumes, right? We're always looking at the car and how the car approaches and enters the site, and how does it proceed to the architecture, to the volume. But what dynamic that creates is sort of, I think, what the board's asking for. And it's not really our job to give you that specific feedback. It's to sort of respond to your presentation. And that's where I'm actually a little bit, in that department. Would really like to give you comments that what we're reading, not comments that we want, because that's not fair to you.
No, I understand that.
Okay.
My concern is that the split zoning and the fact that there's 2 different zones to the site. And so my approach was 2 different areas, and now we're talking about 100% residential on the front one. So that does change it a little bit. So I guess maybe just direction on whether you think there still should be 2 separate zones, given the commercial and the residential, or if you're thinking of kind of a completely different way of looking at that. And then I can kind of go one way or the other based on that input. And I see John has been nodding a little bit.
I think, well, to me, that's a planning commission,
Bingo.
right?
Okay.
It would have been great.
If it's residential or commercial, it's still architecture, it's still building, right? So if you put 6 buildings or 1 building, what's the best approach for this very difficult site, right?
Gotcha.
So it's not a zoning question.
Yeah, and I think that if the planning commission resolves that question, then and they say green light on full residential, it may trigger a completely different concept, because I think the concept that we're looking at is a result of mixed zoning and wanting to kind of accommodate the zoning as it is.
Mhm.
And so if planning commission gives you the green light to proceed with residential, is there another solution that does get us some shared green space, little nicer views, that sort of thinking? Does that then trigger something that starts checking some more of those boxes that would be nice?
I see that's very helpful.
Mhm.
Yeah, because that's my confusion, and I think we'll definitely ask for the planning commission's input on that, and that'll help drive what we do, what we come back with.
Yeah, because my feeling
that's
is
the whole point of having a preliminary review like this, is
exactly,
to really, flesh this out. And I don't want to give the impression that I'm not going to make changes for sure.
When I think what you've done reads very clearly as you wanted to accommodate the existing zoning, and so you fit it. I mean, you made it work. It took some shoehorning and a 10-foot retaining wall and all these things to kind of accommodate existing zoning. So if we take that barrier off of you and say, okay, now get creative with something different, or I should say, if the planning commission does that, because we don't have the authority to do those sorts of things, then is there a better solution that's a little less hardscape, a little more people space?
Also, I think, John, I asked you if you can go higher than 30 feet or 2 stories unless you're deed restricted affordable housing. And currently the answer was no. In order to go higher, you have to be deed restricted affordable, like a Burbank housing type development. So,
Right.
so just keeping that in mind, no matter what I do, we're probably not going to want to trigger that deed restricted affordable housing component, just because a private developer can't afford to do the subsidies are too enormous to and not available really. So so just keeping that in mind.
Okay.
Well, thank you all very much.
Thank you, Kathy.
I've
Go
got
ahead,
just
Lars.
one question, Kathy. So you've been taking notes and you've been hearing our feedback. So I just want to ask you honestly, like, are you willing to make changes? Because I feel like when we did a preliminary review on the Barlow Townhomes project, we gave you a lot of feedback and you brought back pretty much the same design. So not to say that, this design has value, you could come back with the same design, but we've given you a lot of feedback. So honestly, are you willing to take that and try something else?
I am, Lars, because it's a very different circumstance. The floodplain issue over in the Barlow was a huge driver of what I could and could not do. And the client who I was working for had a very strong feeling of the look that he wanted. Whereas my client here is giving me a carte blanche to design. And so the circumstances are quite different. They're both extremely challenging sites, but the constraints on me to meet the needs of both the Corps of Engineers and my client versus this site is quite different. There still needs to be enough of a return on the investment. So, a lot of what drives the density has to do with the incredibly expensive cost of the land. And so I have a sort of a duty to provide my client with something that financially works for him. And so that does drive the density. But as far as the design, I've got carte blanche on that. And I don't have to deal with the Corps of Engineers. I still have to deal with Caltrans, but I don't have to deal with the Corps of Engineers. So yeah. So and also there was no flexibility at that time regarding parking, particularly, in terms of reducing parking. There weren't the avenues that the state's going for now in terms of reducing parking. And so I did what I could do with the constraints that I had over there. And I hope you like how it turned out. It's not necessarily your style, but people who are living there seem to really like it. I did get a chance to talk to a few of them, and they really loved being there. So,
That's great.
but yes, I have taken copious notes. I will not ignore that. But I will say it's a challenging site, as you can tell, because of the slope and access issues.
Yeah.
And density and height restrictions, and how you measure height on a slope site. I'm curious to see, because if you take an average versus each corner, or it becomes challenging to stay within that 30-foot height on a slope site. So just I what I'm going to try to do is not have as much paving. Try to work with Sandy on good ideas on increasing landscape. I certainly took all of the constructive criticism on the architecture, but I do have to work with my client on what his needs are, as I'm sure all of you have had to work with clients. And so finding the right balance, it may not be perfect for anybody's view of what really should be there. My fear on the site was it's so wooded, and that the need for this is a perfect location for the kind of housing that I'm proposing, but I recognize everybody's looked at it as this verdant place with these trees forever, and finding the right way of addressing that. And and recognizing that no matter what we do there, we're going to be taking out a lot of trees, and that's a tough one for people, and I totally get that. So, I'm really going to try to thread the needle of giving my client what he needs on the site, addressing the need for the street, the commercial view of Healdsburg Avenue, and the residential view in the back, and see what I can come up with.
That's great. Thank you. And thanks for all your efforts in this presentation. We really appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome, Lars. Thank you. And thank you for all the feedback.
All right. So unless anybody has anything left to offer, I think we will conclude this segment. Kathy and your team, thank you very much for this proposal. We look forward to seeing what comes back our way after Planning Commission.
Okay, thank you so much. The Planning Commission will see the same thing you saw. Right. I'm not going to change anything between now and then, but we'll hear what they say about the zoning issues, and that really will make a difference on what we turn around and come back with. So
trigger some discussion and figure out where you go from there.
So
sounds great.
Very much. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Bye. Bye, team.
Good night. All right. That was all good and fun and all that. Let's see. Moving on to our next item. Vote on chair and vice chair. We decided to postpone that till our entire board can be here. Carrie, go for it.
So to that note, without Miss Level present, I'm just curious. There's often a dialogue with this Zoom sort of live streaming approach now to our meetings. Still love to be in person, but Miss Level usually doesn't use a camera. How might that persuade or not persuade the board for how we present a meeting, and who's actually possibly in charge or helping the meeting without a possible camera? That I'm just trying to say that because it could be a little tricky to just not to run a meeting without any physical presence, like yourself, Chair Ted Luthen.
Good question.
Yeah, it is a good question. I especially in public meetings, I always like to have see people who are making decisions and making comments. But then again, I'm going to be, sort of part-timer on the board anyway. So it doesn't matter.
So, I mean, just to be clear, I'd rather not see my mug on this video, but it takes a lot of, sheesh.
I'm sorry, you're so purdy though. Yeah, there are jurisdictions that require cameras on, and I know I sit on a couple of nonprofit boards where cameras are required to be.
Oh, really? Is that right? Okay.
Yeah. That it's like part of their public process is that you have to have visual access.
So that's really, I really appreciate that comment, because essentially that I didn't know that existed, but to hear that would be essentially a requirement for someone either being a chair or vice chair.
I think that's a reasonable ask.
I would agree. Mhm.
I'm not sure what the city's policy is on that, so that would be something that, you know, we would have to take a look at. You know, I don't. Obviously, you know, it's our requirement as a member of the board to have your camera on or off, but I'm not sure as far as vice chair and chair if that is a full requirement or not. So that's something that I would have to look into and you know, provide you all with what the determination of that is, and that could, like you said, sway the outcome of, you know, who's potentially voted on for chair and vice chair. I know, you know, soon that we will be going towards some sort of hybrid format. As the, you know, the emergency requirements are going to be changing, I believe, at the end of February for Zoom meetings and stuff like that. There are some possibilities for members of a board or commission to still come in and do remote, but there's a whole list of things that come with that, including the amount, you know, you can only do a certain amount of those per year. You can't do it all the time, so unless there's medical reason or some sort of valid reason for that. So near future, we're probably going to be moving back towards some sort of in-person hybrid format. So
it's good to know.
I miss those times. Just say that.
Seriously. Yeah. A long time ago.
That was a long time ago.
Feels like it, yeah. Well, I mean, I'm bringing all this up, Miss Board Member Level. She's been on this board for a long time, and you know, would be a great candidate.
Yeah, she's definitely got a lot to contribute. All right,
and that's something that, you know, if we are moving this to the next meeting, I can work on, you know, work with Carrie and other city staff as far as, you know, is that a requirement, and then provide that within the agenda packet for this item for voting on chair, or just mention as part of a informational piece or something like that. So
sounds good.
So we're meeting in January 4th?
Yes. That will, if you would like to do the January 4th meeting for that, I know that we do have the First Street project did come back and submit their revised drawings and stuff like that from, was that January of this year, I think, for the 773 and First Street project with the
was this the 10,000 square feet of unconditioned airspace?
Correct.
Wow, I wondered about that one.
Yeah,
so what are that was coming back?
Yeah, so that project, they did submit their revised plans this week. So I will be working on getting that hopefully to, obviously next meeting would not be one that it would be going to, but you know, the second meeting in January or either the first meeting in February is kind of where I'm looking at schedule wise. So.
Well, if the last meeting is any indication, then that might be ringing in the new year with an entertaining meeting.
Yes.
All right.
Let's
see.
Currently,
next one. Oh, go ahead.
We don't have, other than moving the vote for chair and vice chair. That would be the only agenda item for the January 4th meeting. but we can always, like I said, move it to that second meeting where we potentially would have an item, and then the voting for chair and vice chair.
Sounds good. I
Yeah.
think
That is up to all of you.
I can go either way. So if everybody's available on the 4th,
I'm
be a,
available.
I
be
have
a
two.
short meeting and
Okay, sure.
be worthwhile.
Start the
and
year
if
off
we're not,
strong.
exactly. Start the year off by handing off.
Ah,
Ted is just itching.
I was gonna say, sooner the better. Can we call a special meeting next
Can we
week?
do it now?
Do it now. Get them out of here.
Mr. Luthen, you've earned your chops, my friend.
Yeah,
It's been a long time.
True
Had a
that.
good run. It's time for somebody else to take the reins.
Fair deal. Fair deal.
All right. So our last item, we have any subcommittee updates?
Kinda. We have another, we have a design review, design guidelines meeting coming up in January.
Great. And Ted, you're on that subcommittee too, aren't you?
I am
No,
not.
it's,
Oh,
it's
you're not.
Lars-
Okay.
Christine is,
Oh,
and Paul Fritz from the Planning Commission, and Patrick Slater from the council has been on it, but I don't know what's gonna happen with that. If it's been determined or yet, probably not.
I don't believe that the subcommittee designations have been made yet. I know that there was, some sort of talk about opening a public member for that subcommittee, and then then Patrick would be able to apply for that position. Because currently with him not being on the council couldn't really appoint him to that position as a member of the public without holding an official opening for that. So,
Right.
but if they did create a public member, then he could apply for that and go through the process.
Right. So our meeting's on the 12th of January. With the consultant again, presenting what their recommendations or their findings and such.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Carrie, you were saying?
Yeah, I was going to ask Lars. We looked at, as a DRB committee quite a few years ago, we looked at some objective guidelines that were then tossed out. Were those of any value to the subcommittee?
They haven't been looked at yet. They've been just, the consultant has done this work for other jurisdictions and is kind of bringing that step forward, combined with sort of analysis of, their analysis of just current city zoning and patterns and such. Yeah.
So it's a bit of a start fresh approach then.
Yeah.
That's kind of exciting to hear that, be honest. Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty interesting. Definitely. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, so it includes the objective design standards as well as SB9 standards that currently came out where we don't have anything other than what state requirements are in place. So they'll be helping us develop some SB9 standards for residential lots that want to take advantage or are capable of doing that urban lot split, to provide more density within the urban fabric. So
thing to see. All right, then I think that brings us to the end of our meeting. Anybody have anything else? All right.